The Philadelphia Phillies are facing their final opportunity to upgrade this roster in the World Series champion that they desire to be, and added to this by adding outfielder Austin Mays as well as right-handed reliever Carlos Estévez. But in this video, I'm going to break down specifically that Estévez move and why I think it impacts Johan Rojas a lot more than fans would probably like to indicate, and why we may have to buckle up for some significant minutes for Johan Rojas in this playoff run. Now, before I dive fully into it, I do want to make sure you guys are smashing that subscribe button here. That at this point in time, 96.9% of you guys tuning into these videos have not subscribed to the channel just yet. We got to keep this Phillies Digest family growing as we have plenty more baseball to get into as they head into this home stretch of the season. So make sure you're smashing that subscribe button and following along here. Now, so far at the trade deadline, and at this point a little less than 48 hours until that final whistle does blow and all trades are silent, the Phillies have made two deals to this point. And they open things up with the Austin Hayes trade here, which once again looks like bringing in Austin Hayes from the Baltimore Orioles in exchange for right-handing pitcher Seranthony Dominguez and outfielder Christian Pache. Now, we know a little bit about what Hayes does bring to the table, not a ton to dive into from the statistical standpoint, as he has been a platoon option for that Orioles team. Just 3 home runs and 14 RBIs, a .315 on base percentage in 161 at-bats, but it is clear that the Phillies have plenty of belief in him. And why I say that specifically is we do have this quote coming out from Rob Thomson that I think is notable, saying that Austin Hayes will play every day for the Phillies. Thomson said Brandon Marsh will start in center field versus righties, Johan Rojas in center field versus lefties, but the Phillies are not calling a straight platoon, want to get Rojas enough at-bats as well. So you can see how this has shifted the outfield picture a decent bit, with kind of the alignment being Nick Castellanos, of course, sticking in right field, left field seeming to be Austin Hayes' job, and then right center field kind of becoming the platoon position. And Brandon Marsh is a bit of an interesting talking point here, as we do know that that was kind of an all-in move that they did make 2 years ago, and when they first turned the corner and looked like real deal contenders. And kind of the book on Brandon Marsh at the time is a little bit different than what we know it to be then. That at that point, he was looked at as this glove guy, this perfect mix, this surefire center fielder. And the question mark was with his bat. That ultimately has not played itself out. That I think his bat has been far better than expected, but he has not been this reliable glove guy in the way that it was hoped or expected to be. And that's been especially the case lately. That there have been some slip-ups, some balls that he simply should be getting to that has not been the case, which does make me nervous. Now, we do know that that is the reason that Johan Rojas is out there, and it surely is not his offense. And to dive in specifically what he's bringing to the plate, that just 3 home runs and 23 RBIs in 237 at-bats, just 55 hits, and to be perfectly honest, these are hits that are, I guess, a little generous. That this is a soft .269 on base percentage. That they tend to be a lot of squeakers through the infield or finding his way to leg out an infield single, things like that. And I get a hit is a hit. I'm not going to nitpick too heavily on that. But the bottom line is this is never going to be a batter that strikes fear into opposing pitchers when he steps to the plate. Now, the other move that we did see from the Phillies was for Carlos Estévez. And to give the details of that trade here, that they brought in Carlos Estévez from the Los Angeles Angels in exchange for minor league pitchers Sam Algrieri and George Klassen. I've seen some critiques about the price point that was paid, but I think this has a lot more to do with the market, and to be perfectly frank, this was necessary, particularly following the first trade in which Seranthony Dominguez was sent away. Now, Seranthony was a guy that very clearly was not ready for the high leverage moments this year in the way that we have seen him pitch in the past. From my eyes, I thought it was pretty crystal clear that Rob Thomson had lost complete trust in him, and that was not something I think he was going to be able to regain heading into the playoffs. And Estévez has been a guy that has been terrific this year. That this is a guy who's a potential to really nail down that closing role for this Phillies team. I think it's more likely than not that Thomson continues his concept and belief of going by this closer by committee type action, where he is looking at particular guys he wants in high leverage opportunities or playing the matchups in a way that he typically leans on. But Estévez, if he's capable of becoming that ninth inning guy, you will not be worried about what those prospects are. And ultimately, I do believe that the concept or mindset at this point in time for this Phillies team is you don't know how long this championship window is open. You strike when the iron is hot, and that means doing deals right now. Now, for the Phillies as a whole, we do know that they have been struggling lately. And to dive into specifics of this, shout out to our guy Luke Arcani, who'll be back on with the channel breaking things down soon, tweeting that the Phillies have lost 4 straight series against the Oakland A's, the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Minnesota Twins, and the Cleveland Guardians there. They've increased their lead in the NL East by 1 game over the span of those 16 games. Now, just because the Braves have been playing bad does not mean the Phillies have been playing good. And I do think that this does need to be a bit of a reality check for this team. I'm much more comfortable breaking down things from the standpoint of series loss. So 4 straight series I do think is notable. We know what a marathon that baseball is, that I think is unfair to get up in arms after every single game. But there's been some frustrating losses lately, and there's no doubt about it. It's been sloppy baseball. It's been uninspiring baseball, and really a lack of competitiveness that you don't typically feel with this Phillies group. And granted, none of that matters in the long haul. But the ultimate storyline is it's about this team getting hot when the moment matters most, when those playoff opportunities rise. But they're going to have to find a way to flip that switch sooner rather than later. I get we're complaining about this at the tail end of July. It's a different story if they're looking like this getting into September and October and all the other key moments that will be coming. They have been the best team in baseball from start to finish, and that is why they kind of had this cushion to work with. In contrast to the past 2 seasons, in which they did have to fight from behind a little bit, you built that lead up a little bit, and that is why that is the case here. Now, the biggest question mark heading into this trade deadline for this Phillies team, I think, fell into 3 categories here. And that was the starting pitching, which has not been addressed, and I think rightfully so, the relief pitching, which became a bigger need after that initial trade, and the outfield position. Now, we know, once again, with the outfield, kind of the game plan that is being revealed to us for Rob Thomson, that it is going to be Austin Hayes playing left field, and it is going to be a bit of a platoon between Brandon Marsh and Johan Rojas. And as I mentioned, it is quite clear that Johan Rojas is not going to be a guy striking fear into the opponent's hearts at the plate. To look at Brandon Marsh's stats on the season, a little bit better here, 10 home runs and 38 RBIs, a .328 on-base percentage, 31 walks and 255 at-bats, 64 overall hits, a slugging percentage of .424 there. He's a guy who certainly is a far better hitter in comparison to a guy like Johan Rojas, but still not a guy that I'm overly over the moon about being the option here. And for Austin Hayes to put his numbers on the table here, this is a little misleading, as this was a guy that was an all-star last year, and the Phillies clearly believe they can get him back to somewhere near that, but these are not numbers that shine either. And overall, in his 161 at-bats this season, just 3 home runs and 14 RBIs, just a .315 on-base percentage there, and 41 overall hits. He's clearly struggled there and was phased out of that Orioles just rotation or options for playing in left field for a reason. He's also a guy that has some experience playing center field, so I think that should be noted at least as an asterisk as you start to piece together this outfield. But the bottom line is, I think at this deadline, it's clear that there was a lot more buyers than sellers, and that's one of the effects of this expanded playoff. The Phillies have obviously been a beneficiary of this expanded playoff, as they did sneak in as that last wildcard team just 2 years ago. But at this point in time, as you're looking to take this team up another level, there's not as many teams willing to dish out on their players. So I do think it came down to prioritizing for this Phillies team, and it does seem like they may be a little bit more done with things than I hope. I do hope that I'm absolutely wrong on this, and that we do get some, reports out indicating otherwise. There is still about a day and a half at this point, until at the point of me recording this video, until the deadline does come. But we are getting reports such as, quote, the Phillies are likely done adding to their bench. They have told teams they feel comfortable with their group of hitters, and that includes the next wave at AAA. So while that may be true, I'm still hoping this is posturing and smokescreen. I do think it is that time of year where teams are absolutely saying what would help them, not necessarily what they believe is true. And ultimately, we can reflect on that in far more depth following the actual trade deadline. But what I do think the decision was made from Dave Dombrowski up at the front office there is that the key was getting Carlos Estévez to this team. That this is a guy that could be a level of difference maker in a way that none of the other options on the table are or really were available for the taking. And once again, to touch on his stats here, in 34 games this season, he's pitched 34 innings, just 3 home runs allowed, 32 strikeouts, a guy who's only walked 5 guys all season. He's having the best season of his career at 31 years old, which is a bit of a question to me. But when you watch the tape and look at his stuff, it does look nasty. That I do think that there is a world in which this guy can transform himself into the true closer for this Phillies team. And once again, following the Hayes trade, that it became even more of a need to make sure that you added another arm to that bullpen. So ultimately, I think this came down to a couple different things. Number one is that relief pitching was the priority. And number two, that there's still a belief in Johan Rojas in this organization. The fielding is as advertised. That I do think that while he's had a couple mental slip-ups here and there, the ground that he can cover, you just can't teach. The pace that he can play with, the speed, and particularly when you're already going to have a right fielder like Nick Castellanos, who's never going to be an above-average defender. He's a guy who competes, tries, and I respect it, but he's just not. And ultimately, his success or failure will come down to what he does at the plate, and a guy who is probably one of the most hot and cold hitters that I've seen ever. So we will see what version of Nick Castellanos will come down to there. But I do think that is the calculation by Dave Dombrowski, that they can live with Johan Rojas' defense, making up for the deficiency that he has at the plate, and ultimately they had to prioritize adding another arm to this bullpen. Whether or not that is the correct calculation is to be determined, but I think ultimately, as much hate as Rojas gets, that it's not going to come down to his bat. That ultimately, stars need to be stars when it matters most, and that means Bryce Harper, that means Trey Turner, that means Kyle Schwarber, that means Nick Castellanos. It is the big dogs on this team that will ultimately decide the ceiling of the Phillies, and if they can achieve their World Series aspirations. aspirations there. But we will see how things shake out from here. It does feel like the roster is feeling pretty concrete at this current moment, but sometimes the biggest moves happen when when it feels as steady as possible. So we could be waking up to a massive new report in the morning, and I do hope that is the case. Regardless, I'll be with you start to finish right here on Phillies Digest. So make sure you're smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video, and I'll be talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.